All right, so we are going to go ahead and begin our second webinar series for the Global Vision team for Foundation for Liberating Minds. Today, we will be talking about food and diasporas. So I first just want to welcome and thank everyone for joining us today. We have a lot of amazing speakers that will be great to listen and learn from tonight, and I will introduce them briefly. So first off, my name is Monique, and I am an intern for the Global Vision team for FLM. I'm majoring in global studies and political science and minoring in economics, and I'm studying at Oklahoma State University. So international affairs and all things on a global scale have been really interesting to me, which is why I wanted to join the Global Vision team. Like I said, this is one of the primary reasons why I joined. And overall, I just love learning about different aspects of the world and different aspects that we aim to embody, along with the variety of audiences that we're trying to aim and inform, which brings us a little bit to tonight's event. So we have 4 guest speakers that we have with us today. We have Stephanie Eyocko, Kierra Miles, Norma Ruiz Cruz, and Neira Kadic. So we have a variety of different topics that we're going to be discussing tonight, ranging from examining the world through food as identity, community, comfort, colonialism, and also humanity, along with the other different features, followed by a Q&A that we're going to have at the end, followed by questions. So our first speaker that we have is Stephanie Eyocko. She is the Department of Energy Solo Fellow serving at the Maryland Public Service Commission. In this role, she is developing a unified benefit cost analysis on distributed energy resources from the state of Maryland. She is currently the food editor for Mixed Mag, an online multimedia publication dedicated to promoting creatives of color, where she shares the joy and stories found in Black foodways. She is passionate about locally grown food and locally sourced stories. She is fluent in Mandarin and French, and she's also a graduate from the Paul H. Knight School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University, the Johns Hopkins Nanjing Center, and the University of Oklahoma. Welcome, Stephanie. Our next panelist we have is Kierra Miles. She is a Black queer community organizer, advocate, and Masters of Social Work student studying at the University of Houston. She is passionate about healing as activism and advocates for making healing practices accessible for Black and Brown communities. She currently resides in Tulsa, Oklahoma on the Muskogee Creek stolen land and works as a client advocate with Still She Rises, which is a holistic defense office representing mothers in the criminal, legal, and child welfare systems. Concurrently, she's a member of Uprooted and Rising, UNR, Indian Territory chapter of Uprooted and Rising. This is a supermajority BIPOC movement fighting towards ending higher education support of big agriculture and white supremacy and directing the energy of our generation towards food sovereignty. Through her work with UNR, she is a key organizer in the local and national We Feed Us campaign. The We Feed Us campaign is working to establish a mutual aid network through Oklahoma in hopes of creating food sovereignty within BIPOC communities. But very simply put, the We Feed Us campaign will source products from local BIPOC farmers across central and eastern Oklahoma at market price through mutual aid funding and distributes that food directly to the BIPOC communities that have been affected by food apartheid. Welcome, Kierra. Our next panelist we have is Norma Ruiz Cruz. She holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Drama with an emphasis on dramaturgy from the University of Oklahoma. She is a post-secondary education fellow at Impact Tulsa and a Tulsa Service Year Fellow. During her college career, Norma volunteered in several student organizations such as Latin Arte, the United World, Fine Arts Diversity Council, and obviously Unheard Improv. In 2020, she was selected for the New Young Playwright at the LA program, where she held a reading of the first full-length play, Agnes. Norma is also currently writing a play for a reading held at the Great River Shakespeare Festival in April 2021. And this is directed by Gabby Rodriguez. She is also working for the Third Space LLC as a research associate and copywriter for the Amplify Project. She is also a Davis Scholar and a United World College's alumni. Welcome, Norma. And our final guest speaker that we have is Neira Kadic. She is currently serving as the UWC admissions counselor and scholarship advisor at the OU's International Admissions and Recruitment Team. She is also an adjunct faculty teaching International Gateway to College Success courses at the University of Oklahoma. She came to OU in 2013 as an international student and a Davis Scholar from Bosnia and Herzegovina. She graduated with a BA in International and Area Studies with a minor in Spanish in 2017, and she earned her MA degree in International Studies at the University of Oklahoma in 2019. Before joining OU's international team, she also worked as a study abroad advisor for OU's Study Center in Mexico, as well as all the Spain partnerships in OU's Education Abroad Department. She's also fluent in Bosnian, English, and Spanish, and she's also passionate about advancing conversations about equity, marginalization, and intersectionality of identities in international education, and is an advocate for more representation of complex international identities in the field. She has recently found an international employee resource group at OU and serves as an advisor for several international student organizations as well. Welcome, Neira. All right, so thank you guys again for joining us tonight. I'm going to begin with our first question. So this first one, I'm going to start with Kierra, and it's the same for all of you guys. I'm just going to begin with her. But this question is just describe your diaspora and give a brief introduction on how food has played and continues to play a role in your identity. So I'll start with you, Kierra.
Well, first I want to say thank you for having me, and also just want to take a brief second to just give gratitude for the stolen land that I reside on, as well as the food that has nourished my body that was sowed from the land. But yeah, my name is Kierra. I'm a Black American who's a descendant of Africans that were enslaved and taken to Turtle Island. I'm also, my ancestors are white colonizers and settlers as well. And that kind of plays into my relationship with food and how it plays an impact on my identity because of my ancestors being stolen from their indigenous lands. I was disconnected there, and then once they were returned to the lands, they were in North Carolina and Virginia. And I did not grow up there. I did not grow up eating my cultural foods that were something that we had whenever we came to the Americas. And then through that, I grew up in rural Oklahoma in a predominantly white town. So a lot of what my identity to food was just a typical traditional American diet. And it hasn't been until probably the last 3 years where I'm able to reconnect back to my roots and slowly but surely getting closer and closer to a healing relationship with food there.
Awesome. Thank you for your response for that one. I'm next going to turn to Stephanie for the same question.
Thank y'all so much for having me. It really is a joy to come on here and talk about food because I really do love food. But I am from Cameroon, which is located on the west and central part of the African continent. I was born in Douala, which is the largest city in Cameroon and also serves as its economic capital. I lived in Biseka, Edea, with my grandparents. My grandfather has 3 wives, 15 kids, and many, many grandkids, some of which I cannot remember the name. Over the years, we have accumulated a few acres of land, and my family grows anything from macabo, taro. Like if you've ever seen elephant ear that everyone likes to have in their homes, that's macabo and that's taro. That's a food we actually eat and not grow to keep in our homes. That's a whole other story. We also grow dole, water leaf, spinach, and much more. And at any point in my household in Cameroon, so many people needed to eat and someone needed to cook. Whether it was quickly whipping up yuca and palm oil with a little bit of salt because there was nothing else, or making muchumba, which is a 3-day process, right? Many of my family lives on the land or the sea. When you come to my house, you're offered food. You talk about the seasons. You talk about how crops are coming along. It's important for me to acknowledge that Adaya is no longer my reality. I don't live there anymore, but it's something that I so long for. Fundamentally, it is who I am, and I am moved and inspired by dishes I haven't even tried from Cameroon. I have a lot of respect for fishmongers and farmers and anyone who grows food, as it is in itself an act of resistance. Food plays a pivotal role in my understanding of myself. And I think it's also an expression of my identity and my experience in this body that I'm in. So, yeah.
Thank you for your response for that question as well. I'm going to turn it over to Neira next.
Thank you so much, Monique. And I just want to say a huge thank you to FLM, Foundation for Liberating Minds, that just creates so many important conversations and spaces for us to have these conversations that help us heal, but also help us unpack a lot of trauma that we carry. So very, very grateful for you. So I am originally from Bosnia and Herzegovina, as Monique mentioned in the introduction. For those of you that might not know, Bosnia is a post-conflict country. It's a relatively new country in its current form as it exists today. We have essentially been a part of a much larger country, a much larger unit called Yugoslavia, that then fell apart along the ethnic lines in a series of conflicts and civil wars in the 1990s. And today, we essentially have 6 or 7 different republics in different independent countries that used to live and coexist together. So when I think about your question, what I actually think about is migration and how my diaspora is not just my community back home, but also my community here in the United States. When it comes to the Balkans, because we've had so many wars, I feel like we've had, and this is completely like a complete disclaimer, this is just me theorizing, but I feel like we've had 2 big waves of diaspora and of folks moving outside of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Balkans to, seek better opportunities. The first wave was essentially the conflict wave. So in the 1990s, a lot of people fled violence. Those people tend to move in groups and in families, left Bosnia, left the Balkans, went to Western Europe, Canada, the United States, some countries in Latin America, so we're scattered kind of all around. The ones that are in the United States are in huge clusters in Chicago, St. Louis, Missouri, Texas, New York, some are in Georgia, and as you can tell, I'm not saying Oklahoma, and I'm in Oklahoma. So sometimes it feels very lonely because we do have those large communities that are kind of living outside of Bosnia. The second wave of that migration is everything that came after the war. So the 2000s, early 2000s, and everything up until now has been a lot of young people independently migrating from Bosnia to, again, all of these places that I mentioned for educational opportunities primarily and work opportunities. We are still in this transitional justice space in Bosnia that is not fully healed. A lot of corruption, a lot of social political turmoil, socioeconomic differences, and difficulties. So me positioning myself within all that, I came to Oklahoma during that second wave of migration, right? I came here as a Davis Scholar, as a full scholarship student, and I came to a state where, as I said, there's not that many people that have migrated in the 1990s. So to me, as someone who has grown up surrounded by the food that we typically eat at home, which is a mixture of so many different foods, because Bosnia, even though we're in Europe, has been colonized multiple times by the Ottoman Empire and by the Austro-Hungarians. So we just have such rich food traditions and food ways that have, influence from Arabic cultures and Turkish culture and Greek and Mediterranean and all of these different spaces. So me coming here to a space where I cannot access that food that is very complex to make, and I did not pick up all of those because I left home so early. It's just been such a feeling of disconnect and a feeling of longing and missing what I had at home growing up. But yeah, a lot of meat, a lot of potatoes, a lot of kind of stews and, stew-based foods is what we typically eat in Bosnia and that I cannot really access as easily here right now.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you for your response for that first question. I'm lastly going to let Norma end us with that question, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Thank you, Monique, and thank you for having me, as well as everyone else. I am Mexican. I grew up in Tijuana, Baja California, which is by the border with San Diego. My family, so my mother's family is what we consider mestizos, which is mixed race, and my father's side comes from Zapotecos, which is an indigenous group in the south of Mexico, which makes me mestiza. And I am, which is also a term I'm like conflicted about, but we don't have to get into that right now. So growing up, so I'm also a child of migration. My family has moved many, many times for several reasons. My father's family is from Oaxaca, which is very famous for foods like quesillo and like things that you will imagine as Mexican staples that are very rich, very colorful, very vivacious, and very delicious. And my mom is from the north, mainly in Sonora, which is more known for meat and like flour tortillas and that more like, I guess it's closer to Tex-Mex if we're thinking of like American terms. And I grew up in Tijuana in the city. So and my parents both worked all day really. So I ate a lot of food in the street, either tacos or restaurants or quick grab and goes. So I haven't been really connected to the land either way. And then once I came to Oklahoma, I've encountered more of like Tex-Mex. So I first came to the US when I was 16 to the United World College in Montezuma, New Mexico, which is an international boarding school for those of you who don't know what UWC stands for. And it was cafeteria food. And I found out things that you can have egg powder instead of actual eggs. And that's what they gave us. And just these random US things that I didn't know about. So while I have been in the US, I really have found comfort in Mexican American stores and like recent immigrants who have, created shops. I remember there is this raspados shop in OKC that I almost cried in because the lady actually made me a diablito because we just talked about being new Mexicans. I mean, being Mexican and being recently in Oklahoma. So that has really how my food journey has evolved. And Tijuana is also next to the sea, so I really miss the sea. I don't actually like many seafood things, but I at least smell like caldo de pescado and all these like fish smells. So yeah, that's my food journey. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you all for that first question. So like many of you guys have said, how food definitely covers a lot of complex issues and it helps us connect with each other, which we hope to get into tonight. But first off, before we move to the next question, I just want to let the audience know that if you guys are watching right now, and if you have any questions at the end that you want to ask the panelists, please use a Slido link in the description or say any questions you want in the chat on the YouTube live link. So our next question, I'm going to start with Norma. I'm gonna switch things up and then I'm going to bounce it out to Kierra. And then if anyone else wants to say anything, you can. But this next question is, how do you think food plays a role in survival and how has it played a role in your survival?
Yeah, well, I mean, the obvious answer is that we need it to move, to survive, and that's why it's so fundamental. But I think we also need it for emotional survival. I think that food connects you to your family, whether it is there. And I also think there are so many connections with food. Like with food, you're connected to well, whoever harvested your food and like fished it out and, you know, grew the pigs and the cows, then, you know, whoever is next on that supplemental lives, whoever killed the animals, whoever, you know, just prepare everything, process the food, brought it to where you are, and whoever is cooking it, whoever is serving you the food, if someone is serving you the food, and also, you know, whoever you're sharing the food with. So to me, food has a very communal sense, even though I grew up, you know, having to eat in the car with my dad because I was late for training. I had those moments with my father. Like most of my teenage childhood is remembering that my father and I will go and eat, and sometimes with my brother. I know that my mom will not let me out of the house without having breakfast, even if I had to cook said breakfast. She wouldn't let me. So when I moved out of my house, I realized how fundamental that was, because one of the first things I missed was my food, whether it was cooked by my parents. Because even though it didn't happen that often, like I have never tried my mom's soup. Nobody makes it as well as her. And, you know, that's how I learned how to make soup. So now I try to imitate her food. Pizza. I love the pizza in Tijuana more than I like pizza anywhere else. And same with tacos and same with meat. But it also connects me to my family's history, like by having quesillo, which is a Oaxacan type of cheese. I miss that. I don't think any other cheese is better. And it just connects me to my ancestors that it's a history I don't have. I didn't grow up in Oaxaca. I don't know any Zapoteco. I don't know any traditions, but I know the food that they surround themselves with. And I know that I've tasted that, and it's a way to connect with them. I know my mom calls 2 flour tortillas quesadillas, no, 2 corn tortillas quesadillas cucarachas. I don't know where that term comes from. I don't know who came up with it, but I know that wherever my mom encountered that in her journey, that's connected to me, and that helps me survive. And when I was, you know, in the US, like whenever my Mexican friends or even other Latin American friends who had similar food, like helped me connect. And whoever has moved away from their home knows that it's very difficult, it's very isolating, and it's very challenging. And I feel like it's also a complicated relationship because, you know, we are also hearing all these messages that you shouldn't find pleasure in food and all these Weight Watching ideas and all these things. But I think survival with food relates to me because I associate food with people. And even when I cook alone, like I learned that from someone. So yeah, that's my connection to that.
No, definitely. Thank you for response for that. And I really like how you talked about not only is it necessary for physical survival, but also, you know, an emotional sense too, and drives our community, which we're also going to get into in a little bit. But thank you for your response for that. And I'm just going to kick it off to Kierra next.
Norma, I appreciated everything you said. I just connected so deeply with that, and it's so wild to me. Kind of not what I was going to say, but of the interconnectedness and how us as people of color throughout the diaspora who have been impacted by colonization, and how I am trying to find my way back to food. Along the way at the stops is a food that is not from my people or anything, but one of my favorite foods ever is a pupusa. Which for people that don't know is an El Salvadorian food that is kind of like a tortilla pancake that has like a filling inside, and it's my favorite food. But yes, I just love that how the interconnectedness that it brings us back to each other and back to the earth and back to the animals. And even though the animals in a lot of the way that food is produced in mass under capitalism in the US, it's so inhumane, but even then bringing gratitude to what is given to us. But even thinking back to my ancestors and how food was a way for us to get to freedom for my enslaved ancestors. I learned not that long ago that on top of working throughout the days for their enslavers, My ancestors also grew their own food, and they sold them at local markets in order to like buy their own freedom. Or how Black women and femmes would braid rice into their hair on the trips through the Underground Railroad. Oh, I'm sorry. And just how we have been using that. Obviously, we need that to survive, but it has played such a key role in our culture. And even how Black Americans created a whole new food of soul food. And it's just kind of really beautiful of how we have created something new from something that was destroyed. For my personal self, back to what Norma was saying, we live in this world, this wellness world where it's you want to nourish your body and stuff, which is all fun and dandy, but also we're living through a pandemic, and we're all dealing with a bunch of things that are out of our control, that are impacted by white supremacy and capitalism, and really do put an impact on our soul. And sometimes food is so nourishing to our soul. It does connect us back to each other. It brings pleasure to ourselves, and we are all deserving of pleasure. And so I think that for me has been such a key for me to just continue to survive and continue fighting through these oppressive systems.
Right. Thank you so much for your response. I feel like what you were saying too, it kind of showcases that strength and that innovation between those foods that people are creating. So thank you for expanding a bit on that. Do our other two panelists have anything else they want to say for that question, or should I just move on to the next one? Okay. All right, so for our next question, I'm going to ask Stephanie and Neira. So Stephanie, first off with you, how has food become a part of you or your family's sense of community or tradition?
I actually want to share a story about my mom. So for my 25th birthday, my mom came to DC to help me throw a birthday bash. She called me from the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. She was like, I run into some trouble. The bag is so, like, I apparently filled the bag in with too much stuff. Like I have to, purchase more kilos. And I was blown at this. I was like, Mom, you're not going to Cameroon. Like, why is your bag so heavy? Because in my head, I thought she only had clothes. When she arrived at my house, I opened her bag to find pounds and pounds of dried fish, frozen fish, plantain, yams, spices, and all sorts of stuff. I looked at her, I was like, what the heck, Mom? This cost you a lot. And I was like, where's your clothes, sis? Like, I don't see them. And she laughed and said she couldn't come empty-handed. This was her way of showing me that she cared for not only me, but for the people that were going to come to this gathering, right? She wanted to make sure that we had a complete meal and that nobody went hungry. She cooked over like 7 types of foods. She was like up until maybe like 3, 4 in the morning. And I think about that sort of, I guess, this way of my mom showing me that she loves me and those around me. I think about that a lot because something that we do a lot in African communities, in the Cameroonian community here in Dallas, that we have found a lot of solace in, is that we have a lot of gatherings, right? Traditional weddings, graduation parties, women's meetings. All of these gatherings involve food. It is absolutely our way of connecting, right? Like, I can't tell you how many times when I show up to, a women's meeting or something, and one of my aunts is like, hey, I made the thing you like. And I'm just over here like, you did? And she's like, yes. And I also have some extras for you and some Tupperware in the back so you can bring some home. And I feel like that is the way that community is just sort of created in a sense as well, right? That's like the thought of someone feeding you, right? The thought of someone nourishing you, the thought of someone caring for you. All of these things are something that I've learned from the women in my life, like absolutely. And I feel like fundamentally, particularly in my community, our sense of community comes from the women who cook food. It comes from my mother, it comes from my grandmother, it comes from every single woman in my life who have just kind of went out the way to make sure I was fed or to make sure that I had a community to come back to.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And it really shows us and brings us together. And it's also, I feel like, one of the prime ways you can show one another, you know, how to care for each other. So thank you for that story. It was really great. Um, I'm going to move next to Neira.
Thank you. Thank you guys for sharing. I was taking so many notes and I am enjoying every single thing that everyone has said. And one thing in particular that Norma has mentioned in, you know, her response to the second question was that food is communal. And then Stephanie said that food is care, right? Like when our community cares for us, they give us food. And I feel like that in a lot of I'm struggling to find the best word, but like non-Western cultures, that's the thing that happens a lot. It was one of my biggest cultural shocks when I got to the United States and you know, seeing how my community's relationship with food differs from the United States, especially like white United States relationship with food, and how the fast food culture and capitalism have influenced that relationship and created so many disconnects. So for me, the question that you asked about, you know, family traditions, and this is, I believe, something that I addressed in the article that I wrote for the food series. I realized not so long ago, being so far from home, it makes you think a lot, obviously, because you're longing for so many things. So I started thinking a lot about our family traditions as they relate to food. And because Bosnia was a part of Yugoslavia, which was, you know, a communist country, my family lives with these kind of seemingly conflicting ideals. My dad was a communist, like a complete, you know, old school traditional Marxist, but then my family is largely Bosnian Muslim. So we have all of these different ideologies that when you compare them and when you kind of put them on a list, it doesn't make sense that they can coexist in the same house and in the same family, yet they do. So to me, food is a part of creating those little rituals and you know, traditions that I think of when I think of home. So food is memory, and as I said, I'm a Bosnian Muslim culturally. So to me, food is always connected to Ramadan and that special feeling of Ramadan dinners, or iftars as we call them, and just sharing bread. And bread, I mean, it was, you know, the main point in my article. I was writing about bread and I'm like, wow, such a simple thing to write about, yet we have so many versions of it. So I think those little things that I relate back to my family is how we create those food traditions, essentially. Did you eat is a way of saying I care for you and I love you in my house. So I do that a lot with the people I love. I'm not, people who know me know that I don't cook as much, but I do always ask, did you eat? And I always make sure that we do fine food. So I think that those things matter, and those things need to be flashed out, especially as they relate to the traumas that we carry after the conflicts that we've lived and the absence of food. And then, you know, the kind of abundance of food means even more with that in mind. So
Yes, definitely. I also like how you guys have been saying, you know, what food is to you guys for each question. So thank you guys for that. And it just brings a really interesting viewpoint. Did our other two panelists have anything else they wanted to add to that question before we move on to the next one?
I can.
Can I?
Sorry, Stephanie, go ahead.
No, I just want to quickly interject because Neira, ain't nothing simple about bread. Okay, I just would like to put that on the record. That is all.
Thank you so much. I feel like whenever I talk about bread, people are like, really? That's your favorite thing? And I'm like, yes, there are so many types and there are so many different ways that we use it and so many different meals they go with. So appreciate it.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that my grandma does the flying thing with food too. So I relate, Stephanie.
That's really funny. I love that story. So for our next question is, how does food provide you a sense of pleasure or comfort? And I know we already kind of touched on that a little bit. And you can also answer this in your own personal experience or in a broader sense. So I'm actually going to start with Norma for this one.
Yeah, so as I said, I love food. I love eating it. I love cooking it, even though I'm terrible. But I think it just makes me happy to smell something familiar. I think that's what it is. I like the familiarity of smelling something I know, something I recognize. And again, as Neira mentioned, it relates to memories. And it's a gift, really. If you think about it, like, we need that. It's expensive. And whenever you love someone, whenever you like someone, you'll share food. And I think that's pretty cool. So I feel very comforted when people give me the honor of sharing a meal with me, especially when they cook for me. Whenever my friends' birthdays come up, I bake them a cake. It doesn't always turn out good. And I think it's a funny thing because people will eat what you make them, even if they don't like it. And it's so illogical because if you think about it, you're like, well, you're eating something you may just have like a guttural reaction to, but you love that person, so you're going to eat it. And you know that they put time on it and you'll do it. And I think the whole culture that goes around sharing a meal is what I find very comforting. I feel like that has being one of the biggest challenges in COVID for me is that I associate food with people, so it feels so weird to eat alone. Sometimes I call my partner and I'm like, Pilani, I want to eat with you. And we eat over video chat because that's what I miss. And also just the familiarity. Like if I'm sad, like I wrote about carne asada because that is a party food. We have it at weddings, birthdays, quinceañeras, bautizos, like anything that you can think of. Even if people are just like, my favorite team wore, I'll do this. That's why I find the most comforting about food.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it definitely does connect us with familiarity, like you were saying, especially this year with the pandemic too. I feel like what you were saying, like it helps us feel connected, even though those challenges with the pandemic has presented. So thank you for your response for that. I'm going to switch it over to Stephanie for the next part.
First and foremost, I am 110% the type of person who dances when I eat something good. I will just be over here like, because it really does bring a lot of joy to me. I am also the type of person who writes down the way a dish made me feel or didn't. I have a notebook for this, especially for when I'm traveling. I also find pleasure in feeding the people in my life, and I find comfort in the food that I prepare. I think I'm at the point in my life where I'm realizing that there's excuse me. Okay, we're good.
You're totally fine.
I'm at the point in my life where I understand that cooking is my meditative process. I put my phone away, I bring out my brown notebook. It has recipes that me and my grandmother have talked about, me and my mom have talked about. It has thoughts about different types of ingredients, different kinds of spices. And sometimes I can be in the kitchen for hours. And I know now that I don't cook well when I'm stressed. I don't cook well when I'm distracted. And it's a great way for me to engage my senses in a deeply nourishing meditation. And I do this a lot. So, like we're bringing up all these great words like pleasure, comfort, and I also think that Norma brings in an excellent point because food is like I do associate a lot of like making and preparing food with people, but then also sharing food, particularly in the form of recipe writing, is also my way of just sort of sharing it with the world. I recognize now that like not all my friends are going to be able to come into my kitchen and eat with me, right? Or sit at a dining room table with me. So I find a lot of comfort in being like, hey, I picked up this spice the other day. You should try it. It's from China, or it's from Cambodia. It's from all these different places that I no longer have access to going to, but I still want to feel connected to.
Yes, thank you. I liked how you stated how it makes you feel certain things, especially with preparing it as well. Because I know sometimes for me, I'll listen to music when I'm cooking or whatever. So I feel like it's also in that environment as well when you feel those different types of things too when you're preparing that food. So thank you for your perspective with that. Do our other two panelists have anything else they wanted to add to that question?
If I can just quickly say, I've been thinking a lot as I've been hearing both Stephanie and Norma talk about food as pleasure and as comfort, about new traditions that we create, right? Being away from home as an international student or any kind of diaspora member, you are almost forced to make new traditions and to make new memories. So I would just like to, remind myself and people in my life how much I care and how much I value those new traditions that we create. Just eating a certain type of food with Norma actually on this call, eating tacos with Norma has become a new tradition in my life. And that means a lot to me. And that, brings a sense of home to me, even though it's in no way connected to the country that I come from and the type of food that I eat at home. It still feels like home. So I just feel like when we talk about comfort, it's an ongoing thing that keeps adding on with the new traditions that we create with the people we love.
Yes, for sure. Thank you for that addition to that question. It's very insightful. So our next question, or Kierra, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I was just going to say that I just think it's really comforting, our conversation about food and how it makes us feel comforted. I'm just feeling very comforted, and it feels really nice.
Yes, love talking about food, especially with the different emotions and how it makes us feel too. So thank you for that. Our next question is, in what ways do you think colonialism still plays a role in the food we consume or with how we think about food? And I'm actually going to start with Kierra for this one.
So yeah, the impacts of colonization are still so prevalent in our society. I currently reside in North Tulsa, which is the grounds for Black Wall Street and the Tulsa Race Massacre, and how it is considered a food desert, which is a term that is used to talk about a place that has no food or is lack of resources, whenever it's actually the opposite. It was intentionally not given food to these areas. And ironically enough, that deserts by indigenous folks of the Americas has been used to actually, they've actually been able to eat throughout the desert, and it hasn't been a barren without any food. And so how the impacts of colonization that was forever ago, still impacts us to this very day and to my community. And just things so simple of how it has dictated our diaspora, like our language. For example, like in America, we say plantains, and in like the West Indies, they say plantain, and how like even our language has been impacted by colonization. But I also want to highlight how the beauty that also, and how we can also keep some of our traditions. There was a time I spent some time in West Africa, and I was with my friend who was West Indian. And there we drank this hibiscus drink, and there in Ghana it was called sobolo. But she was so excited because that was her drink, sorrel, which is what she drank in the West Indies. And I actually also got to have some sorrel in the Eyocko farmers market a couple years ago. And so it's just like how even throughout colonization, we still are so strong as different people from different diasporas to still keep our cultures connected.
Sorry, I'm also taking notes as well. No, definitely. I do 100% agree with you how it shows our strength and everything moving forward. Because even though, colonialism was such a horrible thing, and, still the impacts last today, it shows, different community strengths with how we're able to create these new foods. So thank you for that. Stephanie, would you like to add anything else to that question?
Yes, actually, so Kierra, I grew, we call it sorrel, so it's like all very funny. I grew sorrel for the first time last year. It was a failed crop, but I was so excited because I didn't think that I could grow it here in the United States, because it is one of those drinks that you drink whenever you're home. People actually, my mom the other day actually purchased dried sorrel, that came from Cameroon. So I'm so glad that you said that. As I mentioned earlier, I am Cameroonian. So for some quick context here, the Portuguese arrived on our coast in 1472. So this is where the name Cameroon comes from. They called it Rio dos Cameros. I might be saying that wrong because I'm not a Portuguese speaker, but that's all right. This basically means river of shrimps because of the Warrior River that is very famous for its shrimps. The first official occupation of Cameroon was led by the German Empire in 1884, right? So they changed the name of present-day Cameroon from Rio dos Cameros to Cameroon, but with a K. German rule came to an end in 1919, and our nation was actually split into two: British, Southern Cameroon, and French Cameroon. I am from the French-speaking part of Cameroon, and I can attest that the only food that really stuck is French, right? Portuguese, German occupation, the food that really kind of, that you still see in many parts of Cameroon is the French. And I find it, especially in former French colonies, it's really interesting. Wherever the French went, they maintained a strong influence over their food. So they obviously tried to recreate that influence when they settled in these places, including Cameroon. And French influence is actually reflected in the presence of very specific foods, like omelets, we eat a lot of. French bread, jambon beurre, which is, I think, ham. It's like a type of French ham. But for the most part, Cameroonians continue to prepare their own traditional foods, which is something that I still think about and I pray about, and you know, it's something that's felt very well rooted in me. But to answer your question more directly, food has never really been about the simple act of eating, right? Food is history and it's identity. Like we try to talk about in all of the essays that we wrote, right? Therefore, colonialism as a violent process fundamentally altered the way of life of many people, including the culinary habits, right? And I think that colonialism still plays a role in how we think about food, particularly in the context of growing it, right? Farmers today, including the farmers in my life, are being forced to change from low-cost, sustainable, traditional agriculture to intensive industrial farming, right? So you're talking about the application of chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and corporate-owned seeds, right? And I think whenever we think about colonialism, we're always thinking about it in the context of something that happened so long ago. Oh, right. Oh, of course, we already went through the process of decolonization. How could it still exist? Well, you're wrong. It still exists, particularly in our food practices, and it's something that I'm trying to fight against by supporting more farmers. You know what I mean? But it's something that's going to be a fight for a really long time, a really long time.
Yes, definitely. It definitely has that lasting impact that we're going to see for a while. So thank you for your response for that. Would our other two panelists like to add anything before we head to our last question? All right. For our last question, I'm going to start with Neira. Do you think food in a way helps us connect a bit more with our humanity? And can you elaborate in a bit in your own personal experience for that question?
That's a wonderful question. And I think as someone who is heavily interested in conflict and post-conflict studies, I think of that in those terms as well. So not only does it help us connect to humanity, it's inherently connected to humanity, right? Dehumanization and the absence of food are strongly related in terms of both colonialism and conflict areas, right? Kierra talked about the food deserts in North Tulsa, and that absolutely does have this impact of dehumanizing people that live there and not considering them important enough to have access to healthy foods and food sovereignty. So again, not only is it related and not only does it help us relate to humanity, it is essential to our humanity, and it's inherently connected to it. So that's one part of it from that kind of big picture perspective. In terms of our humanity and on an individual level, how food helps us connect. I think back to this conversation that we had tonight about how much time and effort goes into preparing dishes, how much knowledge and how much history goes into, preparing dishes. And Stephanie talked about the notebooks that she has and the notes that she takes and all of these different recipes that are passed down generations. So I believe that is, again, inherently linked to humanity, and that shows us humanity through history as well, and how we've changed and evolved over time, and the things that we were forced to do and the things that we chose to do, and our resilience and all of that. So yes, absolutely, humanity and food go hand in hand.
Thank you for your response for that. Norma, would you like to add anything else for that question?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. But I also think, whenever I want to have a difficult conversation with somebody, I ask them for coffee. I ask them to go for lunch. I think it softens us in many ways. I mean, there's always the potential that, yes, someone could really poison your food. And that's like a taste that you're not going to poison that person. So that shows good faith. But and again, as Neira mentioned, it can also lead to your dehumanization, the way that we have a food hierarchy in the US and in other places, the way some foods are considered fancy and some foods are not. Even if the same or more effort goes into preparing those foods in the lower hierarchy of things. The reason why we think Chinese food is cheap and fast and Japanese food is expensive. So much goes into that. The idea that if you have a food, then you have a culture. Even I will say, there is all this argument that Americans don't have culture. And with Americans, I mean US, but that's another fight. America is a whole continent, but I don't have time to discuss this right now. But they do, and part of the reason why people say, oh yeah, the US has no culture is because there is no food to point out, which there is, and there are different things. And also the US has many different cultures in it. It's dehumanizing for all the immigrants who come and have their own culture, for Native Americans, who may also not want to identify with the US either. So that's also another conversation. But yeah, again, it really connects to who we are and how we connect with each other.
Yes, definitely. And also you were kind of pointing out to, that food hierarchy. Sorry, I cannot speak. But I think it also relates to status as well, too, which what you were saying. And that was going to be another question I was going to add. But we didn't have enough time for that. But I'm really glad that you pointed that out, because definitely it does relate to that. Stephanie or Kierra, would you like to add anything else to that before we head into the Q&A section?
This is a great question, by the way. And it's actually something that I think about a lot, because one of my big things is that I want people to know about all the other foods that everyone is eating in all these different countries, right? It's a small but mighty passion project of mine, and I think it was Norma who just mentioned this, but yeah, people associating cheap and fast with Chinese food is fundamentally it's actually one of it's the first thing that I'm trying to battle, because there's nothing true about that. And that is, I cook a lot of Chinese dishes. It's actually one of my favorite foods to cook. But I do think that it has helped me connect with Chinese people. It has helped me connect with their humanity. And it's helped me just sort of talk about their own way of passing down food, passing down tradition, right? So I think that if we can start a conversation with food, we can get a lot of things done, right? Probably not a lot of the hard stuff that needs to get done, but I do think that it will unpack a lot of the ways that we look at each other and the way that we perceive each other. If we just spend a little bit more time reading or even writing about it. So this is, again, something I think about a lot, and I really hope that we find the space in our own lives to extend more humanity to those who do not live here. Yeah, that is something that is fundamental.
Yes, definitely. Kierra, did you have anything else you wanted to add for that question?
No, they nailed it.
All right. So also, like I said earlier, if you have any questions you would like to ask for our Q&A, we have now arrived to that part of the portion of the webinar. So we have 2 questions so far from the audience. The first one is from Paulo, he is from Brazil. His question is, do you rebuild your home through food? I try to do it by relearning to cook my family's food. It's hard and I have to borrow items from other immigrant communities. So I'm just gonna let anyone answer this if you have anything you wanna add. So just unmute yourself and answer if you would like.
I would like to speak to that because I feel like I am thinking about that a lot as someone who lives in a place where, you know, items that I need to cook the traditional dishes are not easily accessible. So I do have to, quote unquote, borrow from other communities. And sometimes there are similarities, and sometimes the type of flour that you use for bread is very different in different places, and the bread will just not come out right if it's not the right type of flour. So then your friend will text you and be like, I found this, brand that you should try, and things like that. And it's a constant reinvention and constant rebuilding, as the person has mentioned. So I do believe, though, that there's nothing wrong. Identities are always in movement, and there's nothing wrong with reinventing home, right? Holding on to those things that we can, and holding on to those things that we hold dear and that are accessible, but also adding all of these new things that, as I mentioned before, that we connect to these new traditions that we create with people we love. So absolutely, it's a constant reinvention and rebuilding process. And sometimes it feels like you're losing a lot because you cannot have everything the same way that it was in a space that you inhabited before. But I think we, for our own well-being, should shift that perspective and think of, how resilient we are and how much more can we create in these new spaces. So thank you for that question.
Yes, I completely agree when you're there. And I also would add that, like, I'm in this weird space of, so a lot of dishes that my community eats sometimes has meat in it. I am a pescatarian who will only eat fish if I know the person who caught it. That is my rule. If we haven't met here, I'm not eating your fish. So I'm in this space where I'm trying to recreate a lot of dishes that my family cooks and trying to make them plant-based. And that is I didn't think it was going to be this point, like this, like, I didn't think it would have to be this hard of a conversation to have on the phone with my mom, for example, but it is, right? Because the way that I feel like my family has sort of like held on to food traditions is by making it the way that those before us have made it, which is important. But I'm at the point where I also care. I mean, I'm a conservationist and I care very deeply about this world and sustainable growing practices. So I would, I'm spending a lot of time right now looking at some of the dishes and recipes that I've, gotten from my grandparents and the women in my life. And I am in a place where I'm changing a lot of things because sometimes it needs to be done. And that would be like sort of like my only advice to like give there, is that sometimes it needs to be done. But then also, as a quick aside, is that I've noticed a sort of upsurge in local grocery stores that actually carry a lot of the things from home, but they're just not called the same things. For example, the other day I was looking for this the spice that we have back home called pepe. I found out that that is actually used also in Jamaican cultures, and I was able to find it. I think they call it African nutmeg. And I was just so intrigued by this because my whole life I thought, oh, I could never find this spice here. right? Like my mom has to, whenever someone comes from home, they bring it. Whenever she goes back, she brings it. And I called her and I was like, Mom, Jamaicans use it too. So I have found myself like a lot of the different spices that I am familiar with, other people in other parts of the world are using it or a form of it. So there is a replacement per se, right? If you go out and seek it, you will find it or something like it.
Yeah, everything everybody has said so far really. Oh, sorry, Kierra.
Go for it.
I'll be quick. But yeah, everybody has said has resonated with me. I think it goes back to this like fight of authenticity. Like I think when I first came to the US, I was like, oh, I cannot eat this. This is not authentic. I was such a snob of Mexican food. But then, at some point, like a few months ago, I didn't have any money. Like everything I used on rent, I didn't have a job. I couldn't work. I was flat and I survived on food pantry food. And I had to make my food with food pantry food, and it was all canned and it was, hand me down. So people were like, oh, I have this. I had canned meat, which feels so weird in my head, but it's canned meat. And I made Mexican food, and it's Mexican because I make it and I'm Mexican. But it's also because, you just follow things, so you just adapt. And it's like, and it's a piece of home. Even though I didn't have any of the ingredients, I still don't have a car to go to Supermercado Morelos or any of the Mexican stores. Sometimes I have to eat from the dollar store next to my house. And that's how I make my food. So I think it just goes back to just owning that. And I also think because of my international friends, there are certain dishes that I did not grow up eating that now feel like home. And I think that's also an important part of adapting and borrowing from people.
What I was gonna say is we as people are so creative and innovative, and I don't think we give ourselves enough credit because we really are, and we've been doing it forever. We've been trading with different cultures forever. We like the things that are here now weren't here before, and vice versa. And so we really are more creative and innovative than we give ourselves credit for. There's not a lot of things I like about the U.S. I do thoroughly enjoy that I can truly eat almost every culture at most major cities. And there's not a lot to say about the US, but that is one thing I'm very grateful for.
Thank you guys for your response for that audience's question. Our next question from the audience is, substitutes are essential for me when I make food from home. What are substitutes that you have found that allow you to make your favorite traditional food? And that's from Falani from Eswatini. So it kind of relates to that first question, but if you guys have anything else you want to add for that, go ahead.
So ndole is my national dish. It's made with a type of bitter leaf that is oftentimes not found here. But spinach works too, right? Like, and I've been using spinach to make it sometimes. But then also, like, when I find myself in a pinch and I can't find like a fresh version of something, another kind of cool thing this is kind of like along the same lines of what Kierra was saying. There's only a few things that's cool about this place, but one of the things is frozen. Because okra is not something that is found year round, right? It has a very short growing period. So I have found myself in the middle of winter wanting some okra soup, and I am able to find frozen okra, and I go back to that a lot. So that's just kind of the ways that I feel like I've been doing a lot of like substitution. Sometimes it's fresh and frozen, or it's like actually like substituting something that I have no access to here. Yeah.
I can go, Pilani. I can answer your question. I mean, okay, Mexicans are everywhere. We just move. I love that. But it is also kind of sad why we have to move. so much. It's like a hate-love reaction. But the hardest thing for me is finding good tortillas. It's such a simple thing, and it's my pain. So I've had to make them, which my grandma, my mom, and my father will probably not believe that I make my own tortillas, but I do. I don't even make them from like the molino and stuff, but maseca. So the good thing about the US is that it also has a lot of quick like shortcuts to food. And maseca is one of them because you only have to add water, and it's the closest it tastes to Mexico. So that's my favorite substitute, which is also Mexican, but it has come to the US.
I love, Norma, that you said the closest it tastes to Mexico, because as Monique asked that question, the first thing I thought about is what are the foods that I eat here that are close enough to home? Not necessarily, and in terms of substitutes, in terms of the ways that we make them, what is something that is close enough? And I think for better or for worse, the fact that there's so much movement and constant trade, as Kierra mentioned, there are so many dishes in so many of our countries and so many of our regions that resonate with something else that someone else is making somewhere else in the world. So to me, I found substitutes for entire dishes. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, again, Bosnia was under the colonial rule of Ottoman Empire. So a lot of our dishes right now are, resonating with like Arabic and Turkish culture. We have a lot of kebabs, a lot of meat. So when I find a good Lebanese restaurant, that's when I say this is close enough. And this is not necessarily how my mom made it and how my mom adapted this dish to our, region and to our reality, but it's close enough to it. And that also feels like home.
I'll be honest, I'm still figuring it out. I don't know what home feels like. I'm still trying to figure it out. And I don't know if I have any substitutes. I when like I said earlier, one of my favorite foods is pupusa. So I try to eat as vegan as possible, but I'll be honest, sometimes I want a bean and cheese pupusa, and I go and get a bean and cheese pupusa because it's not only about the food, it is about the feeling, it is about the cultural experience. So I think it's a journey, and we're all just trying to figure it out.
So we have one more question from our audience. This was also from Pailani. He wants to know, from Eswatini. He also wants to know, what is the next new recipe that you want to try?
Like to eat or to make?
Either one.
I guess I can go since I unmuted. I want to try to make bread. I am very scared. And I didn't grow up eating bread. Like the closest we had, because we had tortillas. So that's what we use as bread. And the closest thing we ate was the bimbo bread, which is kind of like Wonder Bread. But I want to try to make it. I'm not a good baker though, so who knows what will happen. And then I already tried this, but I want to eat it again. So when I was at UWC, one of my friends make he had shrimp noodles. And apparently it's only a Hong Kongese thing. And nobody else knows about them, and you can only find them in Hong Kong. And I just want to have that again.
Okay. Go for it. Okay. Mine, it might be a joke, but it's fine. It might not be from a particular culture, but the culture that I'm trying to substitute and make of my own is from the great state of Texas that is apparently a country all of itself. I really want to remake a vegan version of a honey butter chicken biscuit from Whataburger. I really want that. So that is on my to-do list.
Kierra, we will be in contact because same. I can't eat dairy no more. I'm at that point in my life where dairy just no longer digests. so it's fine. But we're going to talk about that. But also to your point, Norma, we can talk a lot about bread. That is my baby. But to the actual question here, the question that was posed, I want to make, there's this, so when I was in China, I met a lot of people who were from Madagascar, and they would come to class sometimes with these cute little desserts. They're called koba ravina, and they're made using glutinous rice flour, peanut butter, banana, and just all sorts of like fun stuff. I'm trying to expand the desserts I've been making. I'm making too many pastries these days, and I kind of want to like do something like that. And they're also wrapped in banana leaves, which is another reason why I want to remake them. So that is what I am looking forward to making. Hopefully next week I will get some glutinous rice flour and we can make it happen.
Stephanie's the maker. I'm the one who goes to pick up food. So the next thing that I want to try, not to make, but try, is actually a specific place in Norman. I recently talked to one of my Venezuelan friends who recommended it. And I realized that a lot of the Latin American food that I've had has been mostly from Central America and from Mexico. So Venezuela just has so many dishes that seem, so familiar yet so unique. So the place, I'm going to shamelessly promote them. I still haven't tried them, but they're called OK Sandwich. It's a misleading name because you'd think it has nothing to do with the rest of the world, and it's an OK Oklahoma sandwich. But apparently the owners are Venezuelan, and it's a very small food truck. So I am looking forward to trying some of their Venezuelan dishes like cachapas, Venezuelan takes on arepas, and things like that. Really excited. Pilani, maybe we can go together since you're in Norman too.
All right, well, I'm just gonna give one more last call for final questions. If anyone from the audience has any they wanna ask our panelists before we wrap up. Just gonna give us a minute. All right, so there doesn't seem to be any more questions. So I'm just gonna let our panelists give their final remarks if they have anything else they wanna say before we conclude. All right, well, oh, go ahead.
I quickly unmuted myself. Just something that I wrote down with a question mark as we talked today. Norma mentioned it briefly, and she talked about authenticity and what we think of as authentic. And she said it, and Stephanie and I were both like, yes. But she said it's the food that I make, so it's Mexican because I'm Mexican. And that is something that is really, really important. The idea of authenticity, sorry, I cannot speak English. The idea of authenticity is largely done and kind of understood through a white gaze and what, white cultures have deemed authentic in our spaces and in non-Western areas of the world. So you'll hear it a lot if you talk to white people in the United States. When they think of authentic Mexican food, they think of food trucks and taco trucks, which is fine, but they also tend to bargain for price and say that, this taco truck is so expensive compared to these other taco trucks. And I'm just thinking that is such a white way of understanding authenticity in food, and it is so not fair to people who still have to live by the US standards and whose cost of living is the same, yet you expect the price that you would pay, in Mexico or in other places of the world from people who are trying to survive in this country. So just on that note, to rethink authenticity and to think how we think about it and how we understand it. And instead of thinking about authenticity, we should probably start thinking about the communities that we give our monies to, because the food that they make is inherently Mexican or inherently Bosnian or inherently whatever other, Cameroonian, just because they come from those places and they should benefit from those things that we pay for, essentially. So that's all I'm going to say. Thank you guys so much. This was awesome.
Thank you, Neira. And thank you. I just wanted to say that I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been a pleasure to share this space with everybody here. Y'all are amazing. You'll be hearing from me if we are not connected yet. But thank you. And thank you for having us, Monique, and Foundation for Liberating Minds.
Of course.
I have one more point about the white gaze. I think all in all, this has been a very positive conversation, but I also want to leave space of how whiteness and fat phobia and anti-blackness has shaped a lot of people's relationship with food, and how even just having this conversation, there needs to be huge content note, because people cannot talk about food, and all of that has to do with white supremacy and fat phobia. And it just, which is unfortunate because it has brought so much pleasure, nourishment, and culture and community. And it's also such a, it's because of the society we live in, and white supremacy just does such a disservice to people that are living with that.
Yes, that needed to be said, because it's just so important. Yeah, it's just so not funny, but I remember being like, oh man, I can't cook that. Like, oh, it has so much oil, or it has so much this, or it has that, or that. And I'm like, that's not part of my immediate diet right now. This idea of a diet, right? I mean, like putting yourself in this box where you can enjoy the things that you want to enjoy because because of like you want people to perceive you a certain way. I want all of that to stop. And I am trying to work, very hard to get people to just kind of feel comfortable with food in itself, and the value that we have in it, right? So that's just like first point. My second point is that I think it's really important that folks support local farmers. I think if we're going to get to a place where we even have something like a Green New Deal, which is something that I advocate for, we're gonna have to be intentional about the people that we support, about where we put our money, right? Because food is, again, it's fundamental. You need it. You need it. It's not like clothes, maybe, where like, oh, I mean, I could buy something new, right? Like you need food to live. And I think it's important for us to like make the choices about where we get our food, and who grows our food for us, right? I think that I'm pretty sure it was Norma who talked about this earlier, but like every single time you eat something, you have a relationship with whoever grew it, who brought it to your home, right? Who cooked it, all of these things. And I think it's important for us to honor those people, to support them, and really go out of our way to sort of accomplish these things, especially from an agricultural and sort of capitalistic perspective. Lastly, I'm going to put a plug here for Mixed Mag. I think it has been a wonderful space for me to sort of express the Black food pathways, but then also just my love for nourishment, in any form, whether that is nourishment in the form of writing or nourishment in the form of eating. So I hope that you guys will support it, and do all that fun stuff. And then lastly, I'd like to give I think that Foundation for Liberating Minds is just doing love's work. And I think that they are really expanding the way that we talk about colonization, the way that we talk about food, the way that we talk about ourselves, the way that we talk about our cultures. And I think it's just so important for us, for this space to exist and to continue telling these stories. So I am internally grateful, for y'all for even reaching out, right? I'm grateful for y'all giving us a platform to write about. I wrote about leaves, and I'm so thankful that you gave me a platform to do that, because it is something that is really important to my life. So yeah, thank you to the panelists. Y'all are fabulous and amazing humans, and I wish you nothing but grace for yourself. Thank you.
Yes, that's one thing we definitely strive to do. So I just want to thank you guys again for agreeing to come with us today and talk about food and just other topics as well. So I just want to give a final thank you to our panelists, Stephanie, Kierra, Norma, and Neira. It was so great to listen and learn from you guys, and hear those different perspectives on food and just how we think about the world in general. So thank you guys again for joining us tonight, and we're just going to go ahead and wrap up.